It was one of the deadliest coronavirus outbreaks at any nursing home in the country, killing 76 veterans, roughly 30% of all residents, at the state-run Soldiers Home in Holyoke last spring. Last March, the home's superintendent, Bennett Walsh, was quickly put on leave. Governor Charlie Baker brought in an outside attorney, Mark Pearlstein, to investigate. A few months later, Pearlstein released a report detailing numerous decisions from Walsh that were, quote, utterly baffling from an infection control perspective, including the consolidation of 2 dementia units that included some COVID-positive residents, little to no distancing between symptomatic and asymptomatic units, a failure to quickly isolate suspected COVID patients, delays in testing, and continued rotation of healthcare staff throughout the home. A joint legislative oversight committee at the State House also investigated and found a myriad of issues they said created this perfect storm and preventable tragedy. Then last September, Attorney General Maura Healey, whose office concluded its own investigation, filed criminal charges against Walsh and Dr. David Clinton, the home's former medical director. Then a recent Boston Globe Spotlight report has since also raised questions about Governor Baker's role in hiring Bennett Walsh for the superintendent's job in the first place and his administration's oversight of the home. Both employees and families of the veterans have filed lawsuits against the home, and the latter group recently added Health and Human Services Secretary Mary Lou Sutters as a defendant. Now Beacon Hill lawmakers have filed a bill they're hoping will ensure nothing like this ever happens again. I'm joined now by its 2 lead sponsors, State Senator Michael Rush and State Representative Linda Campbell, both of whom served as co-chairs of the Joint Investigative Committee looking into this last year. Representative and Senator, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Representative, without getting lost in the weeds, can you give me some of the highlights of what this reform would be, what this bill would do?
Well, Jim, we came up with 14 points and recommendations. But basically, quickly, they go to chain of command, establishing a very clear chain of command of communication, and thereby establishing clear responsibility. There were major systemic problems with staffing. We went deep into the weeds in the report in staffing, and those problems with staffing were there well before the tragedy occurred. We go into who should be hired, what should their qualifications be. They need to be professional. They need to be licensed. They need to have experience. A superintendent of a long-term care facility is a big responsibility. We look to protocols being established. We look to an omnibus person being put in place. We look to a way for staff to get important information into the right hands. And transparency. And also, these facilities should be part of Medicare and Medicaid. And there's a lot of reasons for that.
Senator, if these reforms that you're proposing had been in place, would we have seen 76 and ultimately 78 veterans having lost their lives out at Holyoke Soldiers Home?
So, Jim, always tough to play the role of the Monday morning quarterback, for sure. But having dealt with these issues, both the representative and I know that there have been historic and cultural issues to both homes over the years. To really understand the issues, you need to look at the history and understand that these 2 homes, their purpose is to serve every veteran across the Commonwealth, and they've really become very isolated in their approach, unfortunately.
But I'm assuming, I want to pin you down there for just a second.
Sure.
It's clear, based upon the qualifications, at least as I read them in your bill, someone without key qualifications like Bennett Walsh could not have gotten this job if your bill had been law. Is that not correct, Senator?
That is correct. Yes, Jim.
Okay. So I want to get back to you, Representative, for a minute. There's one piece of the Globe report that has really stuck with me, and I want you to explain to me whether this would have been caught along the way. I think it was March 27th of last year that Bennett Walsh actually did something right for a change. He knew there was an outbreak. He had a lot of staff off that day, made a request to the Secretary of Veterans Affairs for the National Guard. The Secretary, within 6 minutes, according to the Globe, forwarded that request, sent it up the line. resign to two key lieutenants for Secretary Sutters. We should make the point, Mr. Pearlstein never mentions this. He leaves the implication that Secretary Urena did nothing with this. Hours went by, the dementia units were merged, as you know far better than I, and with fatal consequences. Would something like that been able to happen had the structures you've proposed in your bill been in place?
My personal opinion is I think not. We heard from Secretary Urena. He provided some written testimony, and as you mentioned, provided an alternative view of the situation as he perceived it. And so when there are no clear chain of command established, then these problems occur in an emergency situation. And so, no, I don't think that they could under this, because we make it very, very clear who's reporting to who and who is responsible.
And we should be clear, by the way, I want to clarify, you said a minute ago the Secretary made his representations before the committee. The Globe saw the emails that he forwarded to the people who work for Secretary Sutters. It's not his recollection, they are emails. Right. And speaking of Pearlstein, if I may, Senator, you and Representative Campbell wrote an op-ed in the Globe not too long ago in which you said that the Pearlstein report generated more questions than answers. Do you feel comfortable saying you were able to answer most of the questions that were posed and unanswered by the Pearlstein report?
I do feel comfortable. The rep and I, working with our committee, our legislative colleagues, delved into the issue very, very deep. And again, I go back to Jim. There's a historic and a cultural component to what happened that needs to be understood to try to correct it properly.
You know, I looked into, it appears both of you have taken this very seriously, but Representative, I was really troubled as someone who has followed this closely. After the Spotlight report came out, the Speaker of the House, where you serve, was asked about holding additional hearings, and he's quoted as saying, the Legislative Committee's findings are very similar to what was in the Pearlstein report and what was in the Globe story. That is just completely and totally untrue. The Globe exposed many additional things, Governor Baker's involvement in the hiring, possible political connections, the thing I just described to you from March 27th. So can you assure the public that despite, I think, that lack of curiosity, to be kind, that the legislature is intent on solving these problems, not just brushing them away?
I do, Jim. Our legislative colleagues took this report very seriously. They realized it went well beyond the Pearlstein report and got into some systemic issues that have been ongoing for a while. And as we file this bill, there's going to be more of a process that's going to take place. There's going to be folks that are going to comment on the bill from their perspective. So there's going to be a lot more attention focused on this issue. And I do believe the bill gets us to a point, a very good start point, you know, based on an in-depth investigation. So it's very specific. And I think it goes to the heart of some of the findings that we found. So yes, there's a lot more to be done, Jim. And you know, the legislative process is methodical for a reason. It's going to be a deliberate process, and the bill will evolve, I'm sure, as it goes through the process. So yeah, a lot more attention.
Senator, in terms of input, have you, the two of you, consulted with some of the families about what you're attempting to do here?
So I think, you know, the amount of hearings we had as a committee, the amount of families we heard, the stories, the personal stories, the tragedy and the loss, all went both into our report. And then as we continue to move forward from the report findings, the amount of testimony we heard was incredible from folks directly affected by the tragedy. You're
both veterans. Am I right about that? Am I right about that?
Well, that is correct.
Starting with you, Senator, I am not a veteran, and I have to say the impact this tragedy had on me was incredibly deep. I can't imagine when someone has served the country like you have and like all of those people out at the Holyoke Soldiers Home had, what it meant. How did this affect you? I don't mean you're as a legislator, but I mean as a veteran, as a human being, Senator, starting with you. How did you deal with all this?
It was heartbreaking to see. There was enough tragedy going on through COVID, and then to see that those who serve, those who raise their right hand, willing to die in defense of this country and freedom, that this happened to them and their families. It's just really, it was at the time unspeakable. And unfortunately, we've delved into the very difficult truths and trying to fix this so this sort of tragedy would never and will never happen again.
Representative, what was it like for you as a veteran to have heard this, lived through it, and having heard, as Senator said, having to hear testimony, I'm sure in excruciating detail about the horrors of what happened out there?
Yes, Jim. I would say that the testimony that we heard when we went out to Holyoke was obviously very, very difficult. I think some of those individuals that worked with these veterans for many years, I don't think they're ever going to get over this, honestly, as something that happened to them and the trauma that they witnessed having to care for these in these circumstances. What really got to me at a personal level was that I believe this was preventable for the most part. And I think that knowing as we do now, some of the issues that were there well before this tragedy occurred, that makes you angry. It reinforces the fact it was preventable. And that, I think, is really what got to me.
Well, particularly in light of that, Representative, I only have a minute or so left. Obviously, there are criminal charges against Walsh and Clinton. Do you think everybody who deserved to be held accountable here, particularly in light of your comment, has been held accountable or at least is in the spotlight?
I think that there's probably more to come, Jim. And I think that what has been done thus far is very serious for these individuals. And so I think that as the Attorney General moves forward, I think there will be accountability. But I do think there'll be more as the process unfolds and more testimony is received. It's hard to say what else will come out, right? But I do think that thus far what they've been charged with is very serious.
Last question for you, Senator, on the accountability front. The Pearlstein report has been criticized, I think, appropriately for focusing all the attention on Walsh and the Secretary of Veterans Affairs and virtually none on the Baker administration. Does the Baker administration share some blame for what happened here?
I think that, as previously mentioned, Jim, all involved, it goes to a structural point, and that's what we're trying to get to the bottom of with our investigation. And part of that structure, there have been issues going on with both of these soldiers' homes for many, many years that the rep and I believe could have been dealt with many years ago, and these situations would not have happened. So that's what we're hoping to correct.
Well, we all hope so, too. Good luck to both of you. Senator, Representative, thank you so much for your time and your work. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Jim.